Well, I will mute myself.
Oh, welcome. Right. Well, I think we'll have more people jumping on, and as I said, about halfway through, or before the end, I will post some in the chat, a couple of handouts for you to keep so that you can have the PowerPoint slides. And also I have a little instructions for dream interpretation kind of that you can take home and use with your own dreams. So, well, I'm really glad you're joining us. I'm Dr. Melody Bacon, professor at Chicago School, clinical psychologist. I have spent a good majority of my adult life studying the ideas of Carl Jung. I got to study formally at Pacifica Graduate Institute in depth psychology with the emphasis on analytic psychology. So this has been a passion of mine for a long time and work in my own work in my private practice. In addition, the story of Christmas Carol is really a significant one. It has lived within our culture since Dickens wrote it, and it really touches on a lot of important themes, particularly that of transformation and redemption. So, but I'm going to be talking about the story as though we were going to interpret it as a dream. So you'll have a chance to uh, learn a little bit about some of the ideas of dream interpretation. Now, mind you, people spend years on studying Jung's ideas. We're going to do it in about an hour, so crash course. But there are books, there's a couple that I'll recommend that you can read that are very accessible and easy. Okay, so here's Dr. Jung in his younger days. One of my favorite quotes of his is, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Okay, so this is kind of the overall understanding of Jung and our psyche. When we are looking inside, we're awakening to who we fully are, or have the potential to awaken to that in any case. So, as you may know, just or may not know, we all dream. Sometimes I hear people say they don't dream. This is not possible. You don't remember your dreams. That I believe. But you have to dream. If you don't dream, you can go psychotic. So it's something that's built into our minds. Most of the time, we're going to have dreams during REM sleep. The REM cycle is toward the end of our sleep cycle when we're very active. You'll see people eyes moving, and but you can dream at any stage of sleep, but the ones that are the most prominent are going to be in the REM sleep, and you're going to see your dreams as images or experiences, and also experience them bodily. Okay, so they're and emotionally, it's a lived reality in that moment. So I want to do a poll. Let me see here if I can stop sharing for a minute and get the poll pulled up. And I'm going to ask you, and you can just type in your answer. What do you think dreams are? All right. So, okay, so we got a representation of internal dynamics, random bursts of electrical activity, visions of an alternate reality, data processing, the subconscious work that needs to be done, the unconscious sending us a message, trying to bring it to consciousness. Those are all aspects. And then we had one in the chat. Um, yeah, which was yeah, the unconscious communicating through a parable, or and unconscious the communication with the unconscious. So those are all things that people have looked at in terms of what's the purpose of dreaming in any way? Why do we even do this? And what are they? So some of what we've said, a download of the day's activities, that's what some people think, a boot up sequence for the brain, random electrical chemical firing that occurs, a creative outpouring of the unconscious, okay, a message from God, okay, from the divine, the transcendent, as Jung would say. So let's look at dreams within the context of human culture. And if you look at the Bible as one example, and all of human culture, by the way, it's hard to find, I don't think you could find a culture that hasn't seen dreams as significant and important, except for modern Westerners who are overly educated and have kind of lost their wisdom. So we're weird, literally. What is that? Western educated, whatever. I forgot what weird stands for, but it's an acronym. So dreams and visions are regarded in the Bible as revelations from God, and the entire Bible is the story of God's breakthrough into the human conscious mind via the unconscious. So visions can be included in this as well. Again, you can look at many other examples of cultural phenomenon. The early church regarded dreams the same way, but in the postmodern era, we're very overly focused on the rational and tend to be dismissive of dreams. So we can call this Nicodemus thinking he was a man in the Bible that was very literalistic. So we tend to be very literal, materialistic, preconceived in our assumptions. For example, the idea that the brain is the description of what's going on in your brain when you're dreaming is only a description. It doesn't tell you anything any more than when you're in love with someone and someone says, well, that's just neurons firing in your brain and dopamine and oxycontin are, moving through you, oxytocin rather. So there's the lived reality of something, the description of it, a beautiful sunset. What makes it beautiful? It's just a bunch of particles in the air with light refracting off of it. Okay, so that's where you have it becomes kind of two modes of understanding and two modes of knowledge. They're both correct. So we tend to be dismissive of dreams, but I will say, in my experience, people do think that there's something important here for them, particularly with those dreams you remember and they stay with you. People just, I often will have people tell me, oh, I've had this dream several times. They know there's something here for them. So we do know that our dreams are not limited to data from our personal life. So Dr. Jung found this out very early on when he was working in Berkeley Mental Hospital as a resident in psychiatry, and he's hearing the dreams and other images from the patients that were, and he had also studied a lot of anthropology of writings from all kinds of cultures around the world. He was very curious about everything. And so he recalls, for example, listening to a peasant farmer who was in the hospital for some psychosis, talking about images that he was seeing that were related to a goddess in Indian mythology. And how would this man even know this? He's not literate. So that's when he started to come up with the idea of the collective unconscious, that some images are an inheritance as a human being. And we'll talk about that in a minute, called archetypes. So by working with our dreams, we can grow toward wisdom about ourselves. Okay. So we're more likely to recognize the log in our own eye. In other words, to look at things that maybe we aren't really proud about, but we can at least own that we have these potentialities, but also to give voice to other aspects of ourselves that maybe we don't give voice to because our ego has decided that they're not acceptable, maybe through messages you got growing up, societal, but that really need expression in some ways. Okay. And so your dreams often are revealing a lot to you in regards to something that the ego really doesn't want to look at or ignores. So we're talking about dreams like poetic symbolism. This is from Robert Burns. My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. Now, if you're looking at this, and you're being very concrete, it's like, well, how can your love be a rose? That's a flower. Okay, that's what you do when you say dreams are nothing. Okay, you're talking about your experience of love here. Beautiful, but also, some thorns. Okay, so this is why you want to look at symbols in their entirety. And that is what the way you approach dreams, symbolically. Oops. So the expression of the unconscious. The unconscious really is just aspects of ourselves that our ego has forgotten or has dismissed. We cannot keep everything in our consciousness. We have to live our lives. We have to live our lives in the day-to-day reality. Okay. It's not a bad thing. It's just that we can only be aware so much about ourselves. Even small dreams are important at times, especially when they really click with you. And they show us all of the personalities that exist within us, each of those having independent energies. Okay. You'll sometimes hear someone say, oh, I don't know what came over me. It just came out of my mouth. That to Jung is, for a Jungian is kind of very indicative that there are aspects of ourselves that sometimes take over. So archetypes is, boy, why is this changing on me? Archetypes are universal patterns or tendencies of human unconscious. You see them very clearly in stories. For example, the story of the wicked stepmother. That's an archetype. It just shows up in many cultures. The story of the divine child, the story of Odysseus going on a journey and conquering all kinds of strange things. That's an archetypal experience. People can relate to that, of life, of longing to go home. The wise old woman, the all kinds of things are are archetypes. Okay, so those are just inherent in being human. And then there's a plurality in the psyche that are masculine and feminine characteristics. And we want to try to step out of the gendered language, but Jung couldn't come up with any other words besides anima and animus, yin or yang. He's trying to describe energies. A masculine energy, for example, is going to be very directive from A to Z in a linear line, having a goal, going and getting it, capturing it, and bringing it home. Okay. Anybody who's been in graduate school knows you need to have that masculine energy. Okay. The feminine is more receptive. So if you think about the bright light of the sun being more masculine, very bright, very clear. Feminine is more moonlight, a little more diffused light. It is receptive. It's the idea of waiting until the time is right to do something, which our culture tends to denigrate as being passive. Okay. It's not passive if you're waiting for the right time. Okay. Now there can be. So an image of the feminine, for example, is a spider web. A spider is very active in building her web and waiting, creating the right environment for something to come in. Okay, that's feminine energy. It also tends to be very relational. Masculine energy is more like, a bow and arrow, go and get something. You need both. You need both to be a fully complete human being. And this is where the dreams often will show you the opposite form of the one that your ego identifies with. And that's just one example. But for Jung, it was the idea of wholeness, of being complete, all of these different aspects of yourself, your ego, which is your conscious self. And we don't use the word ego in a pejorative, being egotistical. It doesn't mean that. It means your conscious self. The ego is the bridge from the outer world to the inner. You have to, with your conscious self, make decisions about how to live in this world. Otherwise, you'll be psychotic, okay? But you also have the decision to say, but I am also consciously going to look at other aspects of myself that maybe I don't know about and integrate into my own self so I can become more fully, instead of a one-sided, one-dimensional person, more fully rounded. The ego makes that decision, though, and it doesn't have to do that. However, when it decides not to, you end up with a neuroses, hence why my profession exists. So Jung's idea of individuation, I don't know why this keeps doing this, consists of bringing together all the different persons, the journey to wholeness. That's the journey of life. It's a lifelong journey, not perfection. That's not for humans, but wholeness. So when you think about your dreams, every figure in the dream is a part of you. Sorry to burst your bubble, but there's going to be some person in that dream you can't stand. Guess what? Okay, yeah, been there, done that. I remember having a guy, I do active imagination, I'll talk about it later, and there was this really jerky guy in my dream. I couldn't stand him. So I decided to have this active imagination with him. I said, so why are you here? I mean, what are you doing? What do you want from me? He goes, why do you care? You don't want to talk to me. I'm like, you're right, I don't. But I am. So help. So your imagination, whether you're asleep or awake, is very powerful. I'll give you an example. When somebody has a phobia, it's all imagination. It's not really going on. Otherwise, you're just scared, right? Like there's a mountain lion running after you. That's not your imagination. But if you're afraid, because if I go outside, a mountain lion might get me, and you live nowhere near mountain lions, that's your imagination. And at that moment, when you're having that imagination, your body reacts as though it's going on. Okay. So it's a powerful thing. And I've always said, if your imagination can create those kinds of negative experiences, it can be the mechanism toward healing. So every part of you, your dream is you. You're the mediator, integrating. You don't have to act on them. For example, I don't have to turn into that jerky guy. But what about him might be helpful to me? Maybe I could be a little bit more assertive, because my ego thinks, oh, no, you can't be assertive. Maybe that's a negative thing in my conscious self. That I used to see that a lot when I worked at the hospital. So you can develop a relationship and find out what they have to teach you. One of the primary archetypes is the shadow. And that is the aspects of ourselves that we find shameful or abhorrent or frightening. So if you have a dream where you're being chased by something through the house, somebody, that's a shadow archetype. Okay. Now, sometimes though, a shadow can be a positive that you're, like I said, like being assertive, that the ego sees as a negative because it becomes assertion, becomes aggression. Okay. That's what's called the golden shadow. There's parts of you, maybe you admire people that are really good at public speaking and you aren't. That's a golden shadow. Okay, that's something that you can start to develop. So, but most of the time what we're dealing with in our dreams when we are having trouble with one of the characters is a shadow part of us. Know thyself. So let's look at how do we work with dreams. This is I'll go over each of these a little bit. There's a book I will recommend to you later on by Robert Johnson called Inner Work. And he goes through each of these steps. It's a small work, so it's not a huge, big book, and it's very accessible. It's a great book. So what you do is you start out, you got to write down your dreams. Everybody says they don't remember their dreams. That's because, as you know, our brains are very efficient and we don't remember things that aren't important to us. Okay, we can't. We'd go nuts if we did. So when you decide that you want to remember your dreams, you can put a pad by your bed and just jot whatever few little images come to mind as you wake up. Don't worry about having a narrative. Over time, your brain will start to say, oh, I got to remember this. Okay. And then what you'll do is we'll go over each of these, making associations. You write out the dream, make associations, connect the dream images to what's going on inside, interpret, and then you can do a ritual to make, if you want to, not for every dream, just important ones. So you write out your dream, and I'll give you an example. The other day I had a dream where I was checking into some kind of a apartment complex. I was going to move. I had all of my clothes for some reason in paper grocery bags. And I go away from the front desk. I come back. They're all gone. Somebody took all my clothes. Okay, so that's my dream. I'm looking around, trying to find them. So what feelings do I have with that dream? Well, disconcerted that somebody would steal my clothes. Why? I only have what I have on now. What words or ideas come to mind? Well, clothing represents kind of who you are, what you put on. And is this something about my moving forward where I'm going to be having to change in some way, literally changing your clothes, coming with a new persona? I don't know. Anything that pops to mind, you just write out. And then since all the dream aspects are you, they come from your imagination, your particular point of view. So what do they represent? What do these images represent? What are they trying to teach me? That's where you have to know your own life situation. If I'm moving into a new phase of life, then, which I am, I don't know what the timing is, but it's a different phase. It means that maybe the dream's saying you can't take all these clothes with you. They're not going to fit you. I don't know. It's a possibility. Okay. And it's kind of creepy though, because like, well, then I don't have anything. Okay. So what does it try to teach me? And then when you're looking at connections, where does it click? For me, the click was, just really entering into some new phase, not bringing all the stuff with me that I would normally bring. Now, how does that look, in terms of my psyche? Um, that sometimes you have to spend some time living, and you'll generally will have a series of dreams. Like this one fits with some other ones I've had. So those are, if we had, a few weeks, I could go into more details on the dreams. I wanted to give you an overview. Um, while I have a minute here, though, I want to put in the chat a couple of documents for you, um, which includes steps for working with your dreams that you can download. And then also, if you want the slides for future reference. There you go. Okay. So let's segue into the Christmas Carol because, again, this is a very powerful story. It is performed every year. I like the Patrick Stewart version because it sticks closest to the wording from Dickens. He doesn't really change much. If you read the Dickens story, it's pretty much the same verbiage and the same people. So it's a story that from the beginning, as soon as he published it, it hit home with a lot of people. So that means there's an archetypal quality to it. An example more modern is the Star Wars pictures that came out, the films. That really struck people. I mean, you've got the father archetype, the son. You have all these. That's why people, it's not just that they were good movies, but there was something deeper there that was archetypal. And that was actually consciously in some ways. So it is a tale of transformation. And Jung and many of the people that have studied Jung have been very interested in this idea of transformation, particularly from the era of when we had alchemists who were also looking at transforming things. And so there's stages of transformation, which you can see in your own life. You've lived long enough, you've gone through some of these already. The first part is the black night called Negretto, and it's very dark and difficult to see. So that is when you're aware that something's shifting, but boy, you'd have no clarity here. You don't even know what's going on. It's dark. It's kind of scary. Okay. To me, an analogy would be planting a seed in a deep, dark soil. Okay. Before it sprouts up, it's in the dark. Then you move slowly to the rubedo, which is the moonlit light. You can see a little bit more, a little softer, but still not really clear. And then finally, albedo, the bright sunlight. Aha! Oh, it's clear now. I know what direction I need to go. I can see looking back where I've come, those kinds of things. In some ways, there's a transformation that's occurred. I'm different than what I used to be in some way. So you're going to see this in the Christmas Carol. So we start out where literally talk about dark night. It is at a cemetery. Okay, the coffin has been lowered in the grave of Marley, who was Scrooge's partner and only friend, his business partner. And Dickens states at the beginning of the story, he says, Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. So he wanted you to know we're starting with a death. The end of something, it's final, dead as a doornail at one point. Okay. And then the description of Scrooge kind of mirrors that there is also a deadness about him. He's cold, shriveled up soul. Dickens describes him as a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out a generous fire. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. So just being around him, he felt cold. He's inhabiting the world, but he's not living it. He refuses to change. So here Marley dies. He doesn't even change the sign on his business. He says, oh, well, time will change it and it won't cost us anything. But I think it also reflects on the fact that he doesn't want any change. He wants things to stay the same. However, it's not in his control as things do change. So next we see him in his counting house. He's very unfeeling toward his clerk. Bob Cratchit's miserable in the cold, unheated room. He's dismissive and contemptuous of his nephew Fred, who's his only relative and the only child of his late sister. And then there's two solicitors that show up who are trying to get some donations to help the poor. And he says, well, if they would die, they'd better do it and decrease the population. Okay. Now, remember, this is, if you're looking at a dream, Bob Cratchit, his nephew Fred, the solicitors, they're all part of him. They're unconscious, though. He is not relating to any of them, but they're there. Okay. So they're the potential that he has, the unlived potential, and they all depict something important about Scrooge that he's going to learn about himself. Okay. So how does this happen? Well, we've got his partner Marley showing up as a ghost, terrifying and confusing, a symbol of divine grace. A lot of people in the Bible will be terrified when they encounter the divine. Marley is wearing chains, which is a symbol of how past decisions and actions keep us from growing and becoming who we could become. And that is exactly Scrooge. Boy, he says Scrooge's chains are even more than his. Okay. So, and then if you look at the windows and doors, so not just the people in your dreams, but the images of other things. In this case, windows and doors, they're thresholds between conscious and unconscious realms. And that occurs a lot in this Marley scene. You hear him, first he sees his face on the door knocker when he's going into his house. And then he's, hearing the ringing doors. He's not, Scrooge is locking all his doors, even the inner ones. And then all of a sudden, in comes Marley through a window. Okay. So those are thresholds. And it reflects his closed offness is how he has multiple locks on these doors. And yet here comes Marley anyway. The unconscious is going to come in regardless of what the ego does to try to keep it out. It shows up. So as you know, there are three ghosts that he gets visited by. The past, which is memory, is his personal unconscious. We have our collective unconscious. I talked a little bit about that part of being human. But then there's our own personal unconscious, which is also important. The present, which you're going to see cultural archetypes and shared human experiences. And then the future, which is fear. It's the shadow, but it's also the potential for transformation. So we're going to the past. We start out at the school. There's a lot of loneliness. He was cut off from his father. His father blamed him for the death of his mother because his mother died giving birth to him. He has a very rigid, authoritarian, unforgiving father, which he internalized because you can see him as a man acting the same way. But the interesting thing is he's in one of the scenes, he's there at school by himself. His sister comes to save him. She has been asking their father to let him come home. She's the anima, the relational part of him, the feminine caring for others part that's in situ. It's a potential. And she shows up there, and as he's watching this, he's getting in touch with that a little bit. Then you move forward to his apprenticeship with old Fezziwig, again, another unconscious, only the opposite of his father. Very positive masculine image, successful but balanced, generous, lighthearted. Again, an undeveloped, unrecognized aspect of Scrooge, but a model for Scrooge's redemption. In other words, this is what he could become. And again, as you watch the movie, you can see he gets in touch with how Fezziwig had the potential to make their lives miserable as their apprentices, and he made it a joy. And then he has Belle, who was the woman he was betrothed to, another feminine image, undeveloped shadow, and his pursuit of wealth, the conscious, again, ego. In his view, wealth was the absolute necessity, and he was willing to sacrifice everything to get it, including his relationships. Finally, after many years of being betrothed, and he keeps putting her off because he doesn't have enough money, and she confronts him and says, if you were free today, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, you who weigh everything by gain? In other words, she doesn't come from a wealthy family. At this point in his life, would he even pick her, given that she was not going to bring any money into the relationship? And in that scene, he kind of hesitates, and she says, yeah, I can see by your hesitation you wouldn't. So she wishes him well and leaves him alone in the world, friendless, without a family, without warmth. And this is a scene where he starts to be aware of what he's lost, his younger self walked away from. It's a catalyst for him coming to consciousness, but he had to get in touch with that pain, that painful memory that he did not want to remember. Then we move to Christmas presents. So this is going to be a part of him that is showing him what he's missing out on now, the light and warmth and abundance. The Ghost of Christmas Present shows him the scenes of London, the marketplace. He sprinkles a blessing on the food and urges Scrooge to be mindful of the way in which small acts of kindness can ease the misery of others. Okay, so again, this is a part of Scrooge that he's just quite unaware of and walks through life without even seeing this. Then they visit Bob Cratchit and his family. Scrooge has never taken any interest in. And again, if you look at the shadow, this is a counterpart to Scrooge's life. he has money, but he has nothing else. They don't have money, but they have life and warmth and love, the common human experiences and values. And then you have Tiny Tim. So the archetype of the wounded child, often a divine child archetype as well, a hope, renewal, potential for the future is in that's what a child represents. In this case, he's wounded. He has trouble, but at the same time, his woundedness allows him to be more compassionate toward others. So they exist in Scrooge, but deep in his unconscious, and are aspects that his ego rejects in himself and in others. And that's often the case. We project out onto others things about ourselves. And then finally, we're going to get to the scary shadow of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. There is no voice. It's a phantom, almost like the angel of death. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. So, this is a terrifying figure for him, as it would be for anyone. This figure takes him to a pawnbroker shop where he sees his charwoman, who's a woman who would clean up after him, his laundress, and the undertaker. And each has some item that Scrooge owned. And they're pawning them off, trying to get some money. The charwoman says, every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. And he had no one to, she says if he would have been more human, he would have had somebody to sit with him while he was dying. He was alone while he died. So this is showing him the potential of, if he continues along the road he has chosen, this is the end result. The lack of respect or mourning for Scrooge after his death. And his reaction is that he realizes this is the legacy he's gonna leave if he doesn't change his ways. The futility of hoarding wealth and the importance of cultivating meaningful relationships. In other words, what he thought was important and what really are quite different. So he says to the spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with a death, said Scrooge, or that dark chamber, spirit, which we left just now will be forever present to me. So they go to the death of Tiny Tim. And what he sees is the, brokenhearted family, the death of an innocent child who is in some ways a Christ-like figure with his suffering and potential resurrection through Scrooge's intervention later on. But really the compassion that's mentioned about Tiny Tim, sitting in church, thinking if maybe people saw him, they'd be more compassionate toward others, those types of things that are interjected in the story. That compassion can lead to redemption. Okay, so this is the catalyst for Scrooge's change of heart. So he finally goes and sees his own grave, and he's overcome. He says to the ghost of the future, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, present, and future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone. So the grave symbolizes a psychological death of Scrooge. There will be times when you will dream that you died. This is not a prediction in terms of the immediate future. But something in you needs to die. Some attitude, I don't know what. That's part of what you need to find out. He didn't need to literally die, but something needed to die in order for a new aspect of himself to be born. Okay. And that is the rebirth, his renewal, his integrated personality. And this idea of death and rebirth comes as part of the individuation process. Moving into a new way of being always comes with fear because the ego is afraid of the unknown and also of letting go of what it knows, okay, of the comfort of what we may know. Even though I've worked with people who are in bad relationships, but they're afraid to break up because at least I know what I have, okay? So it's a very common human trait, and yet that grasping onto the old way is what keeps, but you can't have the new until you let go of the old. And that's a leap of faith. So we've got the integration of the unconscious, the terrifying vision of his lonely death and legacy of indifference forces Scrooge to integrate unconscious aspects that he has denied. The transcendent function, which is for Jung, if you don't have connection with transcendence in your life, you will find it in some way, often not good. That's hence the addiction crisis we have. For Scrooge, it was working all the time. The intense emotional reaction Scrooge has to this vision, terror and remorse, and a desperate desire to change represents the transcendent function at work, synthesizing conscious and unconscious to produce a new attitude. It's for a female, it would be like giving birth, which is not easy and it's scary, but you have to go through that to have a new life. Awakening of the self. So the confrontation with mortality, okay? And some of you are on here that took existential psychotherapy with me. That is part of what keeps us centered. We do have our own mortality that we have to wrestle with, but that should take us to a deeper meaning and purpose in our life, aligning him with his true self, not that narrow ego-driven existence he had been living. That wasn't his true self. It was a very narrow range of himself. The anima integration, remember the feminine rather, emotional awakening of empathy and connection. And that's the individuation journey in its entirety. The visionary experience facing his grave represents Scrooge's individuation journey, moving from a fragmented, unconscious state, hardly living, really just existing, to a self-aware whole being. That is what. So the old self has died during the night. If you remember, he wakes up, he's alive, he can't believe it, he's feeling himself to make sure he hasn't died. He's reborn, he's laughing. He hasn't laughed so long, it takes him a while to get a laugh out. He's joyful and generous as he integrates aspects of his shadow. He's now relational, making renewed relationships with his nephew Fred and his nephew's wife, his compassion for the Cratchit family. He demonstrates the works of Jung's idea of the transcendent function in being able to take these opposites and integrate them into a new way of being, and taking the hero's journey, which is an archetypal image. It's all over literature, of facing his inner demons and emerging victorious. This takes a lot of courage. And then synchronicity, because he awakens on Christmas Day. It's a meaningful coincidence. That's what synchronicity is. Something that happens that's not just a coincidence. There's a meaningfulness to us that reflects the connection of psyche and matter. We're not just psyche. We have our bodies. We're both psyche and matter. So what does he do? He makes amends. I'm going to take that out of the 12 steps of AA. You make amends. gives a large sum to the solicitors he turned away. Not a farthing less, a great many back payments are included, and I assure you, not just for this year, but all the years he never gave, he made up for it. He goes to his nephew Fred's for Christmas dinner and knocks on the door tentatively as Fred keeps inviting him over and over. Great example of differentiation of self. It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? And Fred, of course, does. Now he has a Christmas with people and light and warmth. And then he gives Bob Cratchit a substantial raise the next day after Christmas, tells him to add more coal to the fire. They're going to have a nice warm place to work. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. Make up the fire and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. So that's the conclusion of him, and he's known then from that day forward as a man who could keep Christmas better than anybody else. So, Inner Work, I mentioned this by Robert Johnson, is very helpful for working with dreams. Again, it's a very concise book, very well written. And then Dreams, God's Forgotten Language. John Sanford was a Jungian analyst as well, and also looking at dreams through a lot of different lenses. Those are two that I would recommend to you. And now I will stop and open up for any questions that you might have. I know it's a lot in an hour. I mean, all of Jungian psychology. So, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if you have any later, you can always email me. Sometimes things occur to you later. So, well, hopefully you'll take some time to look at some of your dreams. Oh, what motivated me to present this for? I have always loved, thank you. I have loved this story for years, and I decided, as I was thinking about presenting on dreams, I thought, what is it about that story that's so meaningful to me? And so I actually found a book somebody wrote about what was going on for Dickens during that time, and kind of got some insights into that, some of the themes. But it really illuminated for me because I think, the idea of going through something very difficult, but coming out at the end in a new way is really what the hope is for everybody who's going through times of grief or challenges in life. Yeah, Nadia, thank you. She took me for a semester. We had Jung for a whole semester. I'll give you an interesting story about this. So the other one I like for different reasons is The Muppet Christmas Carol. And that is a musical, and actually it's really well done, because I'm dropping the name. I have Michael, but I have the wrong name in my head, who played the Scrooge.
Michael Caine.
Thank you. He played it straight, which so if you look at it, he really is Scrooge. And it's, even though there's some humor in that, he plays it straight. But Paul Williams wrote the music, and he was a songwriter for, very popular. He wrote some of the other songs for some of the Muppets as well. But he had just finished in rehab for, I believe, cocaine addiction, quite a severe addiction. And he was very involved in the 12 steps and sponsoring, and he wasn't sure if he was going to go back into songwriting. He didn't know if that was going to be a good idea for him. And Jim Henson came to him and asked him to write the music for this Muppet Christmas Carol. And he didn't know, if he should get involved in that or not. He said, well, give me the script and let me see. So he goes to a park, looks at the script, he's reading it, and he says, "Oh, this is my story. I have to write this music. This is exactly my story of having gone through this and coming out on the other end in sobriety." So I thought, whoa, that kind of it illuminates a little bit of the why, why the music fits so well for that. And how nice, again, talk about synchronicity. He could see that. So, and you're welcome, Pamela. Yeah, see that movie. So again, I was so impressed. I always loved Patrick Stewart, but and I know he had done it on stage prior to making the movie. And so then I looked at I decided to read the actual story, and I thought, oh my gosh, no, he's pretty much verbatim. This is exactly how Scrooge talks. This is exactly who's in it. He didn't add Belle or anybody like that, so yeah. So yeah, and Angelica says, yeah, yeah, I could do this with the Christmas stories every year. Yeah, let's make it a tradition. Well, we shall see, right? But certainly, literature again. If you look at any book or any movie that really connects with you deeply, look at what it's telling you psychologically. It's important. It's like a dream. In that way. So, if it's living with you, it's the same as a dream. You can do all the same type of work with that as well. So, well, good. I'm so glad you all joined. I so appreciate you taking the time. I hope it illuminated for you options. And Terry has a question. About dreams. Great, I'm so glad. Yes, it's a good start. And whatever you do is fine. There's lots of things you can do. You can draw, you can write, you can do active imagination. And I think, again, getting in touch with our imagination is something we lose as adults. And it's something I think we can easily regain without taking a ton of time and taking art lessons and doing all the stuff we tend to do as adults, which is make more work for ourselves. So, um, just the fact that you're paying attention, I think, well, it'll be food for the soul, literally. So, oh yeah, Dreams and Healing, somebody Ken says, by John Sanford. Excellent. Yes, that is a very good book. Yes, John Sanford's a very good writer as well. He was down here in San Diego before he passed away. Also Episcopal priest. And so very interesting. All right, my friends. Well, hopefully you can download those handouts that I gave you. And again, for any questions you have, just shoot me an email, and you're welcome, Michael. And yes,
Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
yes. Thanks so much, guys. Good to see you. I see my sisters on there. You're welcome, Ken.